Verdun. This name is forever inscribed in bloody letters in the history of the 20th century. The place where in 1916, two great European nations met in a deadly battle. 10 months of continuous hell, 700,000 dead and wounded, 6 million shells fired. The land plowed beyond recognition. Verdun became not just a battle, it transformed into a symbol of the senseless brutality of industrial warfare. Here, on a small patch of French soil, humanity first encountered a new type of war, impersonal, mechanized, aimed at total annihilation. The Verdun meat grinder, that's what contemporaries called this battle, and this definition accurately conveys its essence. People were thrown into battle like raw materials into an industrial mechanism, grinding lives. Every meter of land was paid for with hundreds of lives. And when it was all over, no one could clearly explain why it was necessary. By the beginning of 1916, the First World War had reached a stalemate. The Western Front was frozen in a positional confrontation from the English Channel to the Swiss border. The bloody battles of 1915 had not brought a decisive advantage to either side. Millions of soldiers sat in trenches, separated by a strip of no man's land, while generals racked their brains over how to break through enemy defenses. The German High Command faced a difficult choice. The Kaiser's army was fighting on two fronts, against Russia in the east and against France and Britain in the west. Chief of the General Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, understood that Germany could not afford a protracted war of attrition. The resources of the Entente outweighed the capabilities of the Central Powers. Falkenhayn developed a plan that, in his opinion, was supposed to turn the tide. He decided to strike at France, not with the aim of breaking through the front, but to bleed dry the French army. In a memorandum presented to Kaiser Wilhelm II, Falkenhayn wrote, "France is bleeding almost to the point of exhaustion. If we succeed in opening up the vein of the French army, it will bleed to death." Verdun was chosen as the target for the offensive, an ancient fortress on the Meuse River, surrounded by a ring of forts. This place had immense symbolic significance for the French. Verdun was the last major fortress not to fall during the Franco-Prussian War of 1870. Moreover, the salient in the front line at Verdun was convenient for an attack from three sides. But why Verdun specifically? Falkenhayn calculated that the French would defend this fortress to the last soldier. Every French division thrown into the Verdun cauldron was to be ground into bloody pulp by German artillery. At the same time, the Germans planned to conserve their infantry, relying primarily on firepower. February 21, 1916. A frosty morning. Thick fog envelops the hills and forests around Verdun. In the trenches of the French soldiers, it's routine. Some try to warm up, some clean their weapons, some write letters home. No one suspects that in a few hours, this section of the front will turn into hell on earth. Precisely at 7:15 in the morning, the silence is shattered by a deafening roar. 1,200 heavy German guns open fire simultaneously. Among them are the monstrous 420mm Big Bertha mortars and long Max railway guns, capable of sending 1-ton shells up to 40 kilometers. A fiery barrage of unprecedented power descends upon the French positions. The earth trembles as if in an earthquake. The air fills with a deafening roar, whistling, and the thunder of explosions. Shells fall so frequently that their blasts merge into a continuous hum. French soldiers caught in this fiery onslaught experience true shock. Many have never seen such a concentration of artillery fire. Trenches turn into mass graves. Dugouts collapse like card houses. Telephone lines are severed. Communication between units is broken. This hellish concert lasts for 9 hours. 9 hours of continuous shelling. By 4 in the afternoon, when the German infantry attacks, the French defense is a chaotic jumble of scattered pockets of resistance. Many defenders are dazed, shell-shocked, or in a state of shock. German soldiers advance in a special formation, small assault groups armed with hand grenades, flamethrowers, and light mortars. They bypass pockets of resistance, penetrating deep into the defense. The French fight desperately, but the forces are unequal. In the first 3 days of the offensive, the Germans advance 3 kilometers deep into the French defense, a result unseen in positional warfare, where an advance of several hundred meters was considered a success. The culmination of the first phase of the offensive is the capture of Fort Douaumont, the largest fortification in the Verdun area. On February 25th, a small detachment of German soldiers, led by Lieutenant Brandis, taking advantage of the confusion, penetrates the fort and captures it with virtually no resistance. Most of the French garrison had been withdrawn, as the command believed that the powerful concrete forts would not withstand heavy artillery shelling. The fall of Douaumont causes shock in France. The path to Verdun seems open. However, even in these first days, signs emerge that the battle is taking on a prolonged, grueling character. The German offensive, swift at first, gradually slows down. The French bring in reserves. Resistance intensifies. As the German offensive gained momentum, the French command realized the catastrophic nature of the situation. On February 25th, General Joseph Joffre made a decision that changed the course of the battle. He appointed General Henri-Philippe Pétain, a man whose name would soon be known throughout France as commander of the Verdun sector. Pétain arrived in Verdun at a critical moment. Cold and methodical, he immediately assessed the scale of the problem. His first decision was to organize supplies. The only railway line had been cut by German artillery, and there remained only one road connecting Verdun with the rear, a narrow highway from Bar-le-Duc. This road became the legendary Voie Sacrée, the Sacred Way. Day and night, in blizzards and under shelling, columns of trucks moved along it. 60,000 people maintained this transport artery. Every week, 12,000 trucks passed along the road, delivering ammunition, food, and fresh troops. Soldiers nicknamed it the Road of Life. Pétain introduced a system of troop rotation. Divisions were regularly relieved, preventing soldiers from burning out morally and physically in the hell of Verdun. This decision saved the French army from complete exhaustion. Pétain's second crucial contribution was the organization of counter-battery fire. He gathered hundreds of artillery pieces near Verdun, which methodically suppressed German batteries. Pétain understood. In this battle, artillery decided everything. In early March, the general issued a famous order that became a symbol of French resistance. These 3 words instantly spread throughout France, becoming a national motto. Under Pétain's leadership, the French defense gained flexibility. Instead of clinging to every meter of forward positions, the French created an echeloned defense system. Forward units slowed the German advance, while main forces prepared counterattacks. By the end of March, the German offensive had run out of steam. Falkenhayn underestimated the French determination and overestimated the capabilities of his artillery. His plan of bleeding dry turned against him. German losses were no less than French. Pétain understood the psychological significance of Verdun. He regularly visited forward positions, maintaining the soldiers' morale. His calm confidence spread to the troops. Soldiers trusted their general, and he trusted them. What is hell on earth? For the soldiers of Verdun, the answer was simple. It was their daily reality. In the trenches, stretching across the scarred land, men existed at the very limits of human endurance, in conditions unimaginable to those who weren't there. French infantryman Henri Barbusse wrote in his diary, "Our trench is not a shelter, but a grave we share with the dead." Yesterday, 3 were killed by a direct hit. Their bodies remained with us. We couldn't go out to bury them. We sleep next to them, eat next to them, live amidst decomposing flesh. Rain turned the trenches into mud baths. Soldiers stood knee-deep, sometimes waist-deep, in icy sludge mixed with blood and excrement. Trench foot, the decomposition of foot tissues due to constant dampness, became widespread. Many lost limbs without ever seeing the enemy. German Lieutenant Ernst Junger recalled, "We ceased to be human. We are creatures of mud. Lice cover our bodies in a solid carpet. We haven't washed in weeks. We smell like corpses." The constant artillery bombardment never ceased for a minute. Shells fell with such frequency that soldiers lost track of time. Day and night merged into an endless cacophony of explosions. Many went mad from the continuous roar. "My comrade Jules started talking to an imaginary interlocutor yesterday," wrote Corporal Marcel Dupont in a letter home. "This morning he jumped out of the trench and ran towards the Germans, screaming. He was riddled with machine gun fire. I think he wanted it. Food was scarce and often spoiled. Water had to be collected from shell craters, filtered through rags to remove dirt and the remains of the dead. Rats the size of cats fearlessly attacked sleeping men, gnawing at the wounds of the injured." German soldier Paul Huber wrote, "I killed 20 rats today. They grow fat on corpses. Sometimes we wake up to them gnawing at our boots. One guy had his ear bitten off while he slept." The psychological state of the soldiers deteriorated with each passing day. A new diagnosis emerged: shell shock. People lost the ability to speak, developed tremors, fell into stupor, or, conversely, into uncontrollable rage. "I no longer fear death," confessed French Sergeant Louis Mercier in a letter to his wife. "I only fear going mad before I'm killed. Yesterday I caught myself talking to a severed German head lying on the parapet of our trench." The Battle of Verdun became a proving ground for the latest technologies of destruction, transforming the Industrial Revolution into a bloody military one. Artillery played a key role. The Germans concentrated over 1,200 guns of various calibers at Verdun. The famous 420mm Big Bertha mortars could send 1-ton shells up to 15 kilometers. The long Max railway guns, with a caliber of 380mm, fired 40 kilometers. During the battle, the Germans fired over 22 million shells, about 2.5 tons of metal for every square meter of the battlefield. The French responded with 17 million shells. The intensity of fire was such that the Earth literally turned into a lunar landscape. Machine guns became true human mowers. The German MG-08 and French Hotchkiss fired up to 600 rounds per minute, creating an insurmountable wall of fire. One machine gun could hold back the advance of an entire company. Flamethrowers were used en masse for the first time at Verdun. German assault groups, armed with this weapon, caused panic among the defenders. A jet of burning liquid up to 30 meters long incinerated everything in its path, penetrating shelters and trenches. Poison gases added a new horror to an already nightmarish reality. Chlorine and phosgene caused agonizing death by asphyxiation. Mustard gas, ypirite, covered the skin with terrible burns. Soldiers in gas masks resembled alien creatures, not humans. Aviation became an important element of warfare for the first time. Reconnaissance planes adjusted artillery fire, fighters engaged in dogfights, and bombers attacked rear targets. The famous French Storks squadron, commanded by Captain Brocard, defended the skies over Verdun. Verdun gave rise to new tactics: assault groups. Instead of attacking in dense chains, the Germans began to use small, mobile detachments of 8 to 10 men, armed with hand grenades, light mortars, and automatic weapons. They infiltrated through weak points in the defense, bypassed pockets of resistance, and attacked from the flanks and rear. This tactic later evolved into the concept of blitzkrieg in World War II. A new system of artillery preparation, the creeping barrage, was also used for the first time at Verdun. Instead of a simple shelling of enemy positions, artillery created a moving wall of explosions that gradually moved deeper into the defense, with the infantry following directly behind it. The French responded by creating an echeloned defense and the tactic of elastic defense, where forward units did not hold out to the last, but retreated to pre-prepared positions, luring the enemy under artillery fire. The Battle of Verdun showed that war had become a matter of machines, not men. The soldier was transformed into a maintenance worker for death mechanisms, or into expendable material. Human life was devalued in the face of industrial destruction. The beginning of the summer of 1916 marked a new stage in the Verdun epic. The eyes of both armies turned to a small fortification that became a symbol of the entire battle, Fort Vaux. This concrete bastion, built after the Franco-Prussian War, was located on a hill 4 kilometers northeast of Verdun and was part of the city's defensive ring. The Germans understood. Capturing the fort would open a direct path to Verdun. The French realized the loss of Vaux would be not only a tactical but also a moral defeat. Thus began one of the most dramatic pages of the Verdun grinder. The first German attack on Fort Vaux was launched in March, but the French defenders repelled the enemy. By the end of May, the situation had changed. German artillery methodically destroyed the fortification. 350mm shells pierced the concrete walls, turning the interior rooms into piles of rubble. On June 2nd, the Germans began a decisive assault. Major Raynal, commander of the French garrison, had under his command only 500 men, exhausted, wounded, but full of determination. He relayed by pigeon post to headquarters. Communication with the outside world was maintained only with the help of pigeons. All telephone lines were cut. German assault groups, using flamethrowers, gradually burned the defenders out of the casemates. The French retreated from room to room, turning each corridor into a line of defense. They fought with rifle butts, knives, bare hands when ammunition ran out. One of the survivors, Corporal André Dumont, later recalled, "By June 5th, fewer than 100 men remained in the garrison. Water ran out. The wounded died without medical attention. The air inside the fort became unbearable, a mixture of gunpowder fumes, the smell of corpses, and smoke." The last pigeon flew out of the fort with a note. On June 7th, the fort fell. Major Raynal and a few dozen survivors were taken prisoner. German Crown Prince Wilhelm, who commanded the operation, was so impressed by their courage that he allowed Raynal to keep his personal weapon, a very rare sign of respect for an enemy. The fall of Fort Vaux became the climax of the German offensive at Verdun. French newspapers wrote about a quote, but at the same time glorified the heroism of the defenders. The story of Major Raynal and his soldiers became a legend even before the end of the war. For the Germans, the capture of the fort was a Pyrrhic victory. 6 days of assault cost them thousands of lives. Moreover, on the same day that Fort Vaux fell, on the Eastern Front, General Brusilov's Russian army began an offensive that would soon force the German command to transfer part of its forces from the west to the east. And 3 weeks later, Anglo-French troops would begin an offensive on the Somme, definitively depriving the Germans of the initiative at Verdun. By the summer of 1916, The Battle of Verdun had reached its apex of brutality. However, events on other fronts of the Great War began to exert a decisive influence on the outcome of the battle. In early June, the Russian army under the command of General Alexei Brusilov delivered a devastating blow to Austro-Hungarian positions on the Eastern Front. This maneuver, known to history as the Brusilov Offensive, became one of the most successful offensives of the First World War. Along a front stretching over 400 kilometers, Russian troops broke through enemy defenses and advanced up to 120 kilometers in a short period. The Austro-Hungarian army was on the verge of catastrophe. For the German command, this was an alarming signal. Falkenhayn was forced to urgently transfer 6 divisions from the Western Front to assist his ally. Verdun lost a significant portion of German strike forces, but the real turning point occurred on July 1st, when British and French troops launched a large-scale offensive on the Somme River. The operation was conceived as a way to relieve German pressure on Verdun, and although the first day of the offensive turned into a disaster for the British, who lost about 20,000 men killed, the strategic goal was achieved. The German command faced a difficult choice: to continue the exhausting battle for Verdun or to transfer reserves to the Somme. In the end, Falkenhayn was forced to finally abandon active operations at Verdun. His plan to bleed white the French army failed. Instead, Verdun turned into a bloodbath for both sides. By mid-July, the German offensive had completely run out of steam. The initiative gradually passed to the French. General Pétain was replaced by a more aggressive commander, General Robert Nivelle, who began preparing a counteroffensive. French artillery methodically destroyed German positions, and fresh divisions arrived via the Sacred Way. Positional warfare continued, but now the Germans were on the defensive. In August, Kaiser Wilhelm made a radical decision. Erich von Falkenhayn was removed from his post as Chief of the General Staff. He was replaced by the duo of Generals Hindenburg and Ludendorff, who immediately revised Germany's strategic priorities. Verdun ceased to be the main objective of the German army. The new command focused on strengthening defenses and conserving manpower. Thus, the Brusilov offensive and the Battle of the Somme indirectly saved Verdun. They stretched German reserves and forced the enemy to abandon offensive plans. By the autumn of 1916, the strategic situation had fundamentally changed. Now the French were preparing for a decisive counteroffensive to reclaim lost territories and forts. The Verdun meat grinder continued, but the initiative had passed to the defenders of the fortress. By the autumn of 1916, the situation at Verdun had drastically changed. The French command, emboldened by the weakening German offensive, began planning a large-scale counteroffensive. General Robert Nivelle, who had replaced the cautious Pétain, was a proponent of decisive action. He believed in the possibility not just of regaining lost positions, but of inflicting a crushing defeat on the enemy. Preparation began in September. The French concentrated over 400 guns at Verdun, including the newest 400mm howitzers. Nivelle developed an innovative method of artillery preparation. Instead of a multi-day bombardment of the entire defensive line, he proposed short but extremely intense fire raids on specific targets. On October 24, 1916, French artillery opened a hurricane of fire on German positions. 6 hours of continuous shelling turned enemy trenches into ruins. At noon, the infantry went on the attack. Moving ahead of the advancing lines were new combat vehicles, Schneider tanks, used for the first time by the French in combat conditions. The main objective of the counteroffensive was Fort Douaumont, a symbol of German success in the early days of the battle. The German garrison resisted desperately, but by the evening of October 24th, French soldiers broke into the fortification. The tricolor once again flew over the fort. The recapture of Douaumont caused an explosion of patriotism in France. Newspapers came out with triumphant headlines, and bells rang in Paris. The symbolic significance of this victory was enormous. The French proved that they could not only defend, but also attack. Encouraged by the success, Nivelle continued the operation. The next target was Fort Vaux, the site of Major Raynal's heroic defense. On November 2nd, after a powerful artillery preparation, French troops attacked positions around the fort. The Germans, exhausted by months of continuous fighting and demoralized by the loss of Douaumont, were unable to offer serious resistance. By the evening of November 3rd, Fort Vaux was back under French control. The counteroffensive continued until mid-December. The French methodically recaptured territories lost in the spring and summer. They employed a tactic that would later be called creeping barrage. Instead of one powerful blow, a series of small, carefully prepared attacks with limited objectives. By December 15th, the front line had practically returned to the position it held before the start of the German offensive in February. 10 months of bloody battles, hundreds of thousands of casualties, all for the sake of returning to the starting point. Behind the dry statistics lies the true scale of the human tragedy of Verdun. By December 1916, when the last shots of this epic battle died down, the casualties numbered in the hundreds of thousands. The French army lost about 370,000 men, killed, wounded, and missing. German losses amounted to approximately 330,000. Over 700,000 young men, an entire generation, were wiped out in 10 months of fighting for a patch of land only 30 square kilometers in size. Every square meter of this land was paid for with 10 human lives. But what lies behind these numbers? In the small village of Flisselles in Normandy, out of 40 men of conscription age, 32 died at Verdun. Widows and mothers in black scarves became a common sight on the streets. Children who lost their fathers were called orphans of Verdun. In the Bavarian village of Oberhofen, all 27 men who went to the front did not return home. The village died out 10 years later. There was no one to cultivate the land and continue the lineage. Jeanne Lefebvre, a resident of Paris, lost her husband and 3 sons at Verdun. She wrote in her diary, "My family disappeared in this meat grinder. I live only to remember them." The demographic consequences of Verdun were felt for decades. In France, an empty age group formed. An entire generation of men born between 1890 and 1895 was practically annihilated. In some regions, for every 100 women of marriageable age, there were fewer than 50 men. This led to a sharp drop in the birth rate, which French demographers called the Echo of Verdun. Germany faced a similar problem. In the Rhineland and Bavaria, from where most of the soldiers who fought at Verdun came, entire villages lost their male population. The German writer Erich Maria Remarque, a participant in the war himself, would later write in his novel All Quiet on the Western Front, "Verdun devoured our generation." The economic losses were no less tangible. France spent about 2 billion francs on the battle, an amount equal to the country's annual budget before the war. Germany spent comparable funds, but most importantly, both countries lost their most valuable resource: young, educated, energetic men who could have built the future of their nations. Verdun left behind a generation of widows, orphans, and invalids. Thousands of men returned home with amputated limbs, blind, with disfigured faces, or with psychological traumas. They were called the living dead of Verdun. Many could not adapt to peaceful life. The suicide rate among Verdun veterans was 3 times higher than average. The memory of Verdun forever changed the national consciousness of both countries. For the French, this battle became a symbol of resilience and sacrifice. For the Germans, a reminder of the senselessness of war and the tragedy of an entire generation. When the last shots of the Battle of Verdun fell silent in December 1916, the world was presented with a picture of unprecedented ecological disaster. The land, once covered with forests and fields, had transformed into an apocalyptic landscape, which eyewitnesses unanimously called lunar landscape. In an area of about 120 square kilometers, nothing living remained, only endless rows of shell craters merging into each other in a surreal dance of destruction. 6 million artillery shells, fired during 10 months of battle, had plowed the earth beyond recognition. Craters up to 15 meters deep filled with rainwater, forming thousands of small lakes with poisoned water. The soil was so saturated with metal fragments that compasses in these places showed incorrect directions. The famous forests around Verdun, Cayenne, Fosses, Chemin des Dames, were completely destroyed. Where ancient oaks and beeches once stood, now only blackened stumps and split trunks jutted out, resembling skeletons reaching their arms to the sky. French botanist Henri Dupont, who visited the Verdun area in 1917, wrote, "Here it is as if God has turned away from his creation. Not a single tree, not a single blade of grass, not a single bird, only dead earth soaked in blood and metal." The region's water sources were poisoned by chemicals and decomposing bodies. Rivers and streams turned into foul-smelling ditches, filled with mud and remnants of military equipment. Local residents could not drink this water for many years after the fighting ended. But the most terrible legacy of Verdun was the unexploded ordnance. According to experts, about 15% of the shells fired during the battle did not explode and remained in the ground. This means that about 900,000 deadly surprises still lie beneath the fields of Verdun. French authorities allocated a special territory, the Red Zone, of about 120 square kilometers, where all economic activity was prohibited due to the high concentration of unexploded ordnance and severe soil contamination. These lands, once fertile and inhabited, became a forbidden zone. 9 villages, wiped off the face of the earth during the battle, were never rebuilt. The authorities declared them dead for France. Today, only plaques with names and overgrown house foundations remain of them. Every year, sappers neutralize about 40 tons of World War I ammunition found in the Verdun area. This phenomenon has been called the iron harvest. The earth pushes shells, mines, and grenades to the surface every spring. Even now, more than 100 years after the battle, unexploded ordnance continues to kill. Since 1918, about 900 people have died and thousands have been injured by accidental explosions in the Verdun area. The last fatal victim was recorded in 2015, when a farmer stumbled upon a shell while plowing a field. Nature is slowly returning to the fields of Verdun. Where explosions once thundered, young forests now grow. But this is a deceptive revival. Beneath the layer of soil, the deadly fragments of the past still hide. Verdun is not just the name of a city or a battle. For 20th century France, Verdun became something more. A national symbol, a cornerstone of collective memory, a sacred place of pilgrimage. After the end of the First World War, French society sought ways to comprehend the unprecedented tragedy and find some meaning in it. Verdun, with its unimaginable sacrifices and heroic defense, was perfectly suited for creating a new national myth. Already in the 1920s, the formation of what historians would later call the cult of Verdun began. Memorials and monuments were erected on the battlefields. The central element of the memorial complex became the Douaumont ossuary, a majestic structure holding the remains of over 130,000 unidentified French and German soldiers. Its 46-meter-high tower is visible from afar, serving as a reminder of the scale of the tragedy. Adjacent to the ossuary lies France's largest military cemetery, where 16,000 French soldiers are interred. Endless rows of identical white crosses create a poignant impression. Here, death equalized everyone: generals and privates, aristocrats and peasants. In the 1930s, annual ceremonies commemorating the Battle of Verdun became crucial state events. Presidents, ministers, and military leaders attended them. Verdun veterans enjoyed special respect. They were called Verdunois. Membership in this informal fraternity opened doors in politics and business. In school textbooks, Verdun was presented as a moment of ultimate national unity in the face of the enemy. Pétain's famous phrase, quote, became part of the national identity. Children were taught that the fate of France and all European civilization was decided at Verdun. The Verdun Battle Museum, opened in 1937 in the former Bishop's Palace, became one of the most visited in France. Thousands of artifacts were collected there: weapons, uniforms, soldiers' personal belongings, letters, photographs. Visitors could literally touch history. After the Second World War, the perception of Verdun began to change. If previously the emphasis was on heroism and glory, now the tragedy of the senseless deaths of hundreds of thousands of people came to the forefront. Verdun became a symbol not only of national resilience, but also of the madness of war. In the 1960s, amidst the Franco-German reconciliation, the Verdun memorials acquired new meaning. In 1984, French President François Mitterrand and West German Chancellor Helmut Kohl met in Verdun and, holding hands, honored the memory of the fallen of both nations. This gesture symbolized the end of centuries of enmity and the beginning of a new era of European unity. Today, Verdun is not only a place of remembrance, but also an important educational center. Every year, hundreds of thousands of school children visit the battlefields, forts, and museums. They see the cratered land that still bears the traces of battle, listen to guides' stories about the suffering of soldiers, and learn to value peace. In the 21st century, the French continue to honor the memory of Verdun, but they do so in a new way. The universal human dimension of the tragedy, rather than national pride, comes to the forefront. Verdun becomes a symbol of reconciliation and a warning to future generations. For Germany, the Battle of Verdun became a national trauma that determined the fate of an entire generation. Unlike the French, for whom Verdun symbolized heroic resilience, Germans perceived this battle as a tragedy of senseless self-sacrifice and lost hopes. The collective memory of Verdun in Germany underwent a complex path of reinterpretation, reflecting the political and social changes in the country. During the Weimar Republic, Verdun became a central symbol of the German military experience. Veterans of the battle formed unions, published memoirs, and held commemorative meetings. For them, Verdun was not so much a military defeat as a moral victory, a testament to the resilience of the German spirit in the face of superior enemy forces. The writer Ernst Jünger, himself a participant in the fighting, created in his works the image of a new man, tempered in the crucible of Verdun, a soldier who transformed suffering into strength. German memorials of those years emphasized the brotherhood of frontline soldiers and the commonality of sacrifice. At the cemetery in Fort Vaux, near Verdun, where thousands of German soldiers are buried, the inscription read, "Here lie German heroes." Memorial ceremonies were often held jointly with French veterans. The first steps towards reconciliation were made precisely by those who directly participated in the battle. With the Nazis' rise to power, the interpretation of Verdun fundamentally changed. National Socialists turned the memory of the battle into a propaganda tool, emphasizing not tragedy, but heroism and self-sacrifice in the name of the nation. Verdun became an example of, according to the Nazi version, German soldiers were not defeated on the battlefield. They were by politicians and revolutionaries. This distorted interpretation was used to justify Germany's new militarization. German school textbooks of the 1930s described Verdun as a battle of titans, where German soldiers displayed superhuman resilience. Films and books of that period romanticized the front experience and cultivated the idea of revanche. Verdun veterans received honorary positions and awards if they supported the regime. After the defeat in World War II, Germany once again reinterpreted its attitude towards Verdun. In the divided country, the memory of the battle also divided. In the GDR, Verdun was interpreted as an example of imperialist butchery, organized by capitalists to protect their interests. In the FRG, a critical attitude towards the military past gradually formed, and Verdun became a symbol of the senselessness of war. A real breakthrough occurred in the 60s and 70s when a new generation of Germans began to ask uncomfortable questions about the past. Historians, writers, and filmmakers turned to Verdun as an example of collective trauma requiring understanding. German schoolchildren began to visit battlefields not to cultivate patriotism, but to understand the horrors of war. The culmination of the reconciliation process was the meeting between Chancellor Helmut Kohl and President François Mitterrand in Verdun in 1984. Their handshake over the graves of the fallen symbolized not only Franco-German reconciliation, but also a new European identity based on a common memory of past tragedies. The Battle of Verdun became a true laboratory of 20th century military science. 10 months of bloody confrontation changed perceptions of strategy and tactics, forcing military theorists to rethink the principles of warfare. The lessons learned from this meat grinder shaped the development of military art for decades to come. The main lesson of Verdun was simple and terrible. In industrial warfare, defense has a decisive advantage over offense. Despite a colossal superiority in artillery, the Germans failed to break through the French defenses. Every meter of captured land demanded disproportionately high casualties. This conclusion formed the basis of French military doctrine in the interwar period. The French General Staff, traumatized by the experience of Verdun, opted for the creation of an impregnable defensive line. Thus was born the concept of the Maginot Line, a system of powerful reinforced concrete fortifications along the border with Germany. French strategists were convinced a repeat of the Verdun meat grinder could be avoided by creating an insurmountable barrier. Astronomical sums were spent on the construction of this line, 8 billion francs, which constituted a third of the country's military budget. The Germans drew diametrically opposite lessons from Verdun. They understood that a frontal assault on fortified positions was doomed to failure. Instead, they should seek out weak points in the enemy's defenses and deliver lightning-fast strikes, bypassing fortifications. This gave birth to the concept of blitzkrieg, a lightning war based on a rapid breakthrough of the front by mobile mechanized units. General Heinz Guderian, one of the creators of blitzkrieg theory, wrote in his memoirs, "Verdun taught us that one cannot butt one's head against a wall. One must look for doors or windows. If there are none, one must create them oneself." The battle also changed perceptions of the role of artillery. Multi-day artillery preparations, as the experience of Verdun showed, were largely ineffective. They merely warned the enemy of an impending offensive. Instead, military theorists proposed the concept of a short but extremely intense fire barrage immediately before an attack. This was precisely the approach used by the French in their successful counteroffensive in the autumn of 1916. Verdun also demonstrated the importance of defense in depth. The system of French forts, arranged in several lines, allowed them to withstand the German onslaught even after the breakthrough of forward positions. This principle was adopted by all armies in the world. Another important lesson was the understanding of the significance of motorized transport. The Sacred Way, along which trucks with reinforcements and ammunition moved in a continuous stream, saved Verdun. French General Charles de Gaulle, the future President of France, drew far-reaching conclusions from this about the necessity of creating mobile, mechanized units. The Battle of Verdun also showed the limitations of attrition strategy. Falkenhayn's plan to bleed white the French army failed. German casualties proved comparable to French ones. This forced military theorists to seek alternative approaches, focusing on maneuver and concentration of forces in decisive directions. Ironically, the main lesson of Verdun was ignored by those who should have learned it. The French, having created the impregnable Maginot Line, left the border with Belgium unfortified, considering the Ardennes impassable for large forces. It was through this sector that German tank divisions broke into France in May 1940, outflanking the Maginot Line. Today, military academies around the world study the Battle of Verdun as a classic example of how not to wage war. Senseless frontal assaults, disregard for human lives, lack of clear strategic objectives, all these mistakes cost both sides dearly. 100 years have passed since the last shots of the Battle of Verdun rang out, but its echo still resounds in the hearts of Europeans. This 10-month meat grinder, which consumed 700,000 lives, became more than just a military battle. Verdun transformed into a universal symbol of the senselessness of war and a warning to future generations. The battlefield, scarred by millions of shells, today represents a vast memorial complex. The Douaumont ossuary holds the remains of 130,000 unidentified soldiers from both armies. Their bones are mixed. In death, there is no difference between French and Germans. This symbolic detail reflects the main lesson of Verdun. In war, there are no victors, only victims. Throughout the 20th century, Verdun played a special role in the process of Franco-German reconciliation. Former enemies found the strength to overcome mutual hatred and build new relations on the foundation of shared tragedy. In 1984, German Chancellor Helmut Kohl and French President François Mitterrand met in Verdun and, holding hands, honored the memory of the fallen. This gesture became one of the cornerstones of European integration. Today, Verdun is not only a place of remembrance, but also an important educational center. Every year, hundreds of thousands of school children and students from different countries visit the battlefields, museums, and memorials. They see the land, still bearing the scars of war, and understand, such a thing must never happen again. The philosophical lesson of Verdun lies in the realization of the fragility of human civilization. At the beginning of the 20th century, Europe considered itself the pinnacle of progress, and just a few years later, it plunged into an abyss of barbarism. Verdun showed that the thin film of civilization can rupture at any moment, unleashing primal cruelty.